Hello, my name is Margaret Graziano. Welcome to Work Liberated. Today we have an extraordinary guest. His name is Russel Lolacher, and he talks about relationships at work. And if you work for a living, you know that 30 to 40% of your aggravation is due to interpersonal conflicts at work. So welcome, Russel.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome. So we first met when we were talking about transforming friction to flow. And that's something, one of the trainings that I offer for my clients is response agility. So how do you transform your internal friction to flow? How do you transform your team's friction to flow? And if you run an organization, your organizational friction to flow. Statistics currently, Gallup did a survey, and I know these numbers are always changing, depends on who's doing the survey, but that over 40% of all workplace friction is due to interpersonal conflict. How do you feel about that? What do you have to say about that?
I'm not surprised at all. Anybody it surprises should give their head a shake. I repeatedly say that every job is a communications job. I don't care if you're frontline or you're the CEO. Mm-hmm. Every job involves communication. And it's so funny because it's such a throwaway thing. People don't value it as much as they should. But the DNA of all interpersonal relationships is how do we communicate with one another? And to hear those stats never surprises me. And it's always communication, good or bad, is the root of all bane and all success. Whether it's gone well or it hasn't, you can always root it back to communication.
Say that again.
No matter what the problem is in your organization, you will find the root of it at either good or bad communication.
Yeah, so that's great. So let's go there. How do you know if you are a bad communicator?
I think you need to look at things like retention. I think you need to look at things like satisfaction scores. I think you need to look at things like, those are all results. And unfortunately, we wait till yearly reviews, 2 yearly reviews to go, oh, wait, maybe we should do something about this or anything at all. I think we have a larger problem, especially when it comes to leadership. I think there's a systemically broken problem when it comes to leadership. And I think a lot of organizations are so busy, which in my mind, I think is one of the biggest blind spots to leadership, that they don't look at these bigger systemic problems. And communication is certainly one of them. I would say other ones. What's that? Sorry?
What are the others?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So first off, I want to talk about being too busy. That's the one that I feel is the one that's brought up all the time. It's almost used dismissive. How many leaders do you hear go, I got 5 minutes for you? That's not leadership. That is barely management. That means you can't manage your time or your boundaries, or your boss isn't letting you. So I think the first blind spot I think that we use as almost an excuse to be leaders is I'm too busy. Let me give you 5 minutes. Or here's your greatest gift is I'm giving 5 minutes back to you at the end of a meeting. I'm like, I cry inside every time anybody tells me at the end of a meeting going, you have the gift of time. I'm like, no, this could have been an email the whole time. Could have been an email. Yeah. So I think that's one of the biggest ones. There's so many others. Like the other one I find is a blind spot is around, I call it the one of cowardice, where a lot of
cowardice,
fear, because they don't want conflict.
Yes.
There's a lot of organizations that will have this, well, it'll work itself out. Anytime they hear any problems, anytime they see in a survey, stats on bullying, they'll be like, oh no, they'll work itself out. Or they'll go, oh, another leader will deal with that problem.
Yeah. So
where's the ownership there?
What we see is I call it in my book, Ignite Culture. And if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably read the book. I call it cordial hypocrisy. And Patrick Lencioni calls it artificial harmony, like, see no evil, hear no evil. I don't know what's going on, but you do know what's going on. You just don't want to deal with it.
Well, there's also this cognitive dissonance, which is another blind spot that I like to bring up, and totally in alignment with what you're talking about, is but it's not my experience. Like you'll go to a colleague or another boss and go, X person is a horrible leader, impact after impact after impact. And they'll go, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's not my experience. And it's such a dismissive attitude where the narrative they've told themselves based on their own experience limits itself from allowing worldviews of others to penetrate it. And that just allows bad leadership to fester and fester and fester. And another thing that just breaks my heart.
Yeah. And so what I see is often that happens because there is a fear. If I take this person on, if I talk to this bully about being a bully, they might leave. And if they leave, they'll take all their clients and they'll go away. And we can't have that. So we've got to put up with it. And in the process, what it does is it erodes trust. And it erodes trust, and it creates more gossip and more complacency and more artificial harmony, or worse, more bullying, because people think that's the way to get things done.
Absolutely. And not to go through all this list of blind spots, but it leads perfectly into accountability or the lack thereof. We talk about bad leaders all the time and going, we need to fix bad leadership. We need to do X. We need to address them. But nobody talks about the person that hired them. No one talks about the person that was in charge of their performance reviews or perpetuated and allowed that bad leadership to fester.
Yeah.
So we talk about responsibility all the time. Look at your job description. That tells you what you're responsible for. But how accountable are we to those people that we are supposedly responsible for? And that's where I think we're really having a problem here with leadership, is that we're not accountable to when it's bad. We certainly take it on when it's good and rave about it. But when it's bad, it's that bad leader's problem, not the culture or the organization's problem.
Yeah. And what I notice in the work that we do is if you don't have a noble cause, like if your cause is making money, you're going to filter all your decisions. What's going to help me make more money? What's going to cause me to lose money? That's how you're going to make decisions. But if you have a noble cause, which all organizations should, should is not the right word. I invite every organization to have a noble cause, something that inspires people, and real values, not just a laundry list of what you bought at CultureWise of 30 values that we're going to have, but like 3, like Microsoft with under Satya Nadella has 3: accountability, respect, and integrity. 3, easy to define, easy to train to, not always so easy to conform to, but at least you can talk to people and say, hey, when it comes to accountability, we're missing something. When it comes to respect, you just railed on 7 people in that meeting. That's not respectful. When we have 30 values, folks, really hard to coach people on that. So Russell, what do you have to say about, in your world, relationships at work? What role does the cause of the company or the values have on relationships at work when they work?
Everything. And it's one of the, such a missed opportunity. And I mean, we can get into purpose statements, vision statements, mission statements. I mean, they all kind of are all tied together. It's that greater understanding that what you're doing is tied to something bigger than you. It's tied to something of actually helping others. It's not a poster on a wall. It's not something you put on a website to entice people to apply to the organization. And then we forget about these things. We don't do anything. Like, I love the examples you provided, because one more thing also it's memorable. If you go into your organization and ask anybody what your vision, mission, purpose statement is, and they're like, I don't know, it could be 3 words, but if they don't know what it is, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's got no resonance. And people don't feel connected to it. So it comes back to a communication exercise. Are the words relevant? Do they matter to you personally? You have your own values. Do those align with the place in which you work? Mm-hmm. And I think if you can really get your vision, mission, values, purpose statement, if you can get all that right, where you are proud of it, then the next step is operationalizing it. It's really understanding, okay, well, that's what your value is. Say accountability. Well, what does that actually look like in the organization?
Yeah.
How do you reward that behavior? How do you reinforce that behavior? Because again, if it's just a poster or a website, it's a false statement because it actually doesn't mean anything. Are you hiring based on it? Are you promoting based on it?
And what are the consequences for not? That's what nobody wants to talk about. What are the consequences when you have somebody we're saying accountability, but let's use the word respect that almost everybody has in their values. Well, what happens when you're not respectful? What are the consequences? Do we talk about it? Do I have therapy about it, or coaching or counseling? Or do we all pretend we didn't hear it and maybe it'll mean it didn't happen?
And I'll go one step further on that as well, is defining it. Because we have a lot of diverse people that work from different geopolitical, cultural, everything. And what you think is respectful might be very different than what I think is respectful.
Right.
So we need to, I love that I keep coming back to communication. We have to define what these words are. Leadership, communication, those need to be defined.
Yeah.
We certainly throw them around like they're just a word of the day calendar exercise, but we don't actually go in and go, well, this is what I think leadership is. I'll give you an example.
Yeah, give me an example.
If you go to anybody in an organization, they'll be like, define leadership to you. And I mean, anybody in the organization, they'll be like, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, this is what leadership is. Great. Then you see how the organization operates. Who do you promote? Based on being Simon Sinek or Brene Brown? No, you promote people or reward people based on fixing your problems or because they deliver a result, not how they got the result itself. So it's what the organization's really telling employees is the ends justify the means. Mm-hmm. It's not about the relationship to get to those results, which is a byproduct of a great relationship, great work ethic. It is the success metric. So you could be the most great Brene Brown, Simon Sinek clone in the world, but if you're not making X widget or delivering X service, you're fired or you're not promoted appropriately.
Yeah.
But we're ignoring the DNA.
Yes, that's so good. So gosh, there's so much here. I think it's a yes and. I think so.
Okay.
So we use a survey in our work, and PricewaterhouseCoopers surveyed 300,000 CEOs. They all said, no, not all, 75% said the number one criteria they look for on their leadership team is a results producer. Number two is the behaviors to get those results. But you and I both know that number one is here, and number two is way down here. And only do they deal with number two when it gets, this is interesting to try to do this on camera. Only when it gets really dysfunctional do they really deal with the number two. And then what I've seen is then they want to fire the person, but they didn't deal with the issue as it happened. And then the next issue as it happened. And they didn't even try to rehabilitate the person. They're just now done and you're out. And I think that's just as much part of the problem as the original person being the violator, because the world is filled with executive coaches now. And all these companies are paying for coaching and development, but if they have cordial hypocrisy and they don't want to deal with the issue in the moment of the issue, they're at fault in why this went on so long. Anyway,
I'm going to be a big jerk here.
Russell.
No, I'm going to be a huge jerk here. The reason there's so many executive coaches is because that's where the money is. Mm-hmm. That's where people hire, is at executive coach level. Here's the problem. Executives have been rewarded for not being leaders. Mm-hmm. They've been rewarded for delivering. They've been rewarded, as I've talked about, promotion, not about the human skills. So now they're supposed to learn all these human touchy-feely stuff when they've been rewarded and paid not to. Don't get me wrong. I'm painting a very broad brush here. But if you want real, impactful, better leaders, you're at the middle management. You're at the entry level. Mm-hmm. This is getting habits formed, practices made, mindset shifts. It's not a result after the fact. It's strategic, which is before they need it. And I think that's one of the bigger problems. But unfortunately, of course, budgeting, all the money's at the executive level. So that's why we have executive coaches.
So you
don't see many middle management coaches.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you believe people can change?
Of course.
Okay. So you believe people can be rehabilitated from bully to compassionate human being who can be patient and work with people?
Yes, but I also don't think it's a straight line. I think there's a lot of ego involved. I think there's a lot of, it's It's certainly not a, hey, if I take 2 coaching sessions, I'm a better leader.
No.
This is not a checkbox exercise.
Yeah.
This is a development conversation. One of the things that keeps coming up on my show, Relationships at Work, is that we keep hearing about leadership development. And every time I hear about leadership development, I'm like, no, it's personal development. All we're talking about is empathy, listening. It's like, it's just going to make you a better leader. So why do we differentiate? We're just trying to make you a better human. Can this be better? Absolutely. There's tons of stories like that. But there's also more stories of leaders going, am I done yet? Am I done yet? Because I did this last week. Do I have to do this again? They compartmentalize it because they're so focused on the end justifying the means, not how to be better for the means part.
So I have a good story.
Please do.
We have a guy that got an executive coach. And I don't think he heard in the Designed Alliance that there were some things in his behavior that didn't work. He did the work, but after he felt that he had gotten to the top of the mountain, he would procrastinate on calling his coach. He had one good moment in an executive meeting where he didn't get reactivated. And they kept giving him, like the CEO kept saying, like, we got some challenges here. In the end, he lost half of his responsibility because he wasn't connecting to the people. And he said he didn't know, and he didn't know that he didn't know, but I've been talking. I wasn't his coach, but he was being coached by my organization. And so I check in with people, and I know there's no end to the mountain, but it changed the trajectory of his career because he was such a blockhead. He didn't understand that plowing through people to get results is not gonna eventually gonna get you where you want to go. It's gonna make you go backwards. So you said, let's get the managers early in the game or middle management. And then you also said, but nobody wants to spend the money. So what's the solution?
I think it comes back to, so there's the first thing I talk about when I talk about leadership is there's 3 things we need to have great leaders. One is self-awareness. Second is situational awareness. And third is that communication. It's know yourself, know the environment in which you work, and then figure out how to connect with those in which you work. The first part of that, the self-awareness piece, I think you can only control what you can control. And as a leader, self-leadership has got to be where you start. If you're not getting the development you need in your organization, if you're not learning how to better communicate, if you're not, go out on your own, read books, take classes. Yeah. You need to be responsible for your own development. If you get mentors, talk to other people, do reverse mentorship from younger people that might have different experiences and different perspectives than you. I think we can't control the larger cultures. We can control the subculture, first ourselves and those on our team. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations will just focus on what's our culture. I'm like, you have 7,000 cultures. You don't seem to understand that piece. So I think it's the modeling the behavior. I was very lucky. I actually had a team where I was able to retain them for 12 years, the exact same team. And it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work every day, making sure that they were getting what they need, that they felt listened to, that they felt nurtured, that they felt they had the opportunities, that I was there to listen for challenges. And I think that's where we start, is because if we can model that behavior, you're going to get people going, are you hiring? Because I'd love to work for you. Are you hiring? Or others, you know what? I have retention it's a revolving door. What are you doing? Well, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. It's not going to be a quick process, certainly is not, but it does show a little bit of, if you can demonstrate leadership, leaders lead. And that's how you have to start.
Well, let's go back a little bit to take your development into your own hands. I remember I had a coach once who said, if it's to be, it's up to me. And I think that entry level and that mid-level, and I tell people right now, because my company doesn't just do executive coaching. Mm-hmm. We work with the cohorts to make change happen. And so they have group coaching and they have individual coaching. But I always say, when I'm leading a program, no one's coming. No one's coming. There is no white horse and no prince. It's you. And any of these naughty behaviors that you have at work, like CCing 25 people on an email or calling people out for not getting something done and humiliating them in front of a room of 19 people, all of that is stuff you do at home too.
Mhm.
And if you don't believe me, ask your spouse. And then they're like leaning in, like, what do you mean I don't leave my poor behavior in the car? Especially parents. They don't want to give their kids these nasty habits.
You've tapped into something I think that a lot of leaders, good and bad, really have no concept of the impacts they have in the workplace. And a parent is a perfect example. I start off every episode of my show is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Mm.
And I'll say 90% of the time, it's from 2 to 3 decades ago. And it is, well, most of the time it's negative because that's always the first thing that comes up. But this isn't a bad day for somebody. This is trauma that they have carried with them for decades.
Mm.
And there is that leader 20, 30 years ago that had no idea that they were doing this to another human being. They didn't know that they were having such ripples in the pond that have influenced their work relationships, their personal relationships, their baggage, their triggers. And as a leader, we have so much responsibility. On the flip side of that, we've got amazing leaders that have inspired and motivated people just because they listened that one time, because they sat down at a cubicle or went on site and just asked them questions or gave them an opportunity that nobody else did. And then they're seeing that behavior and carrying it on with their own leadership down the road, going, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to feel. And then those ripples in a pond help others down the road. So I think your parent example is perfect, because that's exactly what you're doing, is you're growing and nurturing others, for bad or for worse.
Yeah. So there's 2 things about this that I want to make sure we cover. And one of them is, so we've got the battle for technical supremacy. You've got a new podcast that came out with Mark Andreessen, and it's actually very, very good. And before you know it, we're all going to have robot dogs and robots, and half of the work is going to go to automation. What does that mean for the people when you can leverage technology the way that the US and Canada and China and Japan and Brazil and Israel and all these places are going to leverage technology? What happens to the human dimension?
It doesn't go anywhere. It will always be there. AI is not replacing humans. Technology, it's not like when we suddenly got tractors instead of, oxen to pull, humans disappeared. Like, technology is just a tool. Where the humanity problem comes in is relying too much on the tools. It's allowing it to replace that humanity. And it goes back to relationships. If you use technology too much, it will create a disconnect from those you're trying to connect to, because you won't look relevant, you won't look relatable, you won't look sincere. You'll look like you're just making shortcuts around the humanity of it.
Say that again. Say that statement. No, not the whole thing.
Right.
If you use too much technology and it gets in the way of relationships,
it will actually diminish relevancy. It will actually diminish connection, because you're putting something between you and the other human. And relationships are built between 2 humans, not a human, AI, and another human.
So now you're in a meeting. I have a chapter of this in my book with Donna, and she's running a meeting. And as the one person's talking, everybody's on their phone or on their computer. I know you've seen this in your work. Totally. How do you stop that nonsense?
Here's the interesting thing, I think, and I bring this up and it pisses off a lot of leaders. You have to be more interesting. There are people that do presentations or do meetings and everybody's on their phones. They're like, get off your phone. I'm like, you be more interesting. You be more engaging as a leader in front of the room. You talk about things that are relevant, that interest me, because I'm going to tune out. I'm going to go to my phone. I'm going to go to something else. We don't have enough people that are good communicators. We don't have enough people at the front of a room that can command a room, that can be talking about things that actually connect to people. So of course people are going to disengage because you're not making an effort to engage them. How many managers look at a presentation 5 seconds before they go out and present it in front of people?
Yeah.
Like, you're not taking this seriously, so why should anybody else in the room?
Yeah. Good. So then the other question I had is, if you could give your top 3 or 5 here's what you need to be a better communicator. What are they? What are the top 3 or 5 tips, tricks, tools?
I think first off, we're going to go back to that presentation piece. If you're standing at the front of a room, and there's a big difference between reporting and presenting. You should never have anybody in the room go, hey, you could have just given me the PowerPoint presentation or the slide deck. I didn't need to hear you recite back word for word what the slide deck said. You need to be a person that a presenter entertains, a presenter presents. It is a presence thing. And that only comes with practice, 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 and understanding what you wear, your tone of voice. I don't care if it's on a computer virtually or it's at the front of a room. It's all the same thing. It's inflection, it's tone. Take Toastmasters. I don't care what it is. But until you can be somebody that people want to listen to, nobody's listening to you. They have other things to do. They're busy too. So I think from a communication standpoint and building a relationship, you have to be somebody that people want to build a relationship with. I think another thing around communication, and this is a bedrock of communication, is trust. You need to be somebody that people trust, or they're not going to read or listen to anything you have to communicate. And one of the key things I bring up around trust is that people will treat trust in the workplace so like it's a different thing. Like it's what's trust like in the workplace? I don't know. Do you have friends? Do you have family members? Because building trust with them is the exact same freaking thing in the workplace. Transparency, consistency, making an effort, being honest. These are foundational human things. And yet we in the workplace want to go, well, what is your trust strategy here in the workplace? Have you done a Gantt chart? Where's your Excel spreadsheet for trust?
Oh my God. Okay. So
we can't do that.
I have a great book. It makes sense to refer it now. It's by Fernando Flores and Robert Solomon, and it's called Building Trust. And I cannot tell you, Russell, how many times I have recommended that book to leadership teams and they've never read it. It's so simple. Plant the seeds, water the root, and nurture the plant. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If plans changed, then and circumstances changed, we'll communicate that. But it's just amazing to me at, the see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. People think that's better than just getting out in front of the problem. So we've got build trust. We've got become a better public speaker, speak so people listen to you. What else? What are some others?
I think a big piece of this is getting to know your audience. We are not islands. So communication is two-way. It is what you say and how it's understood. Unfortunately, most organizations just focus on the first part, and that's called broadcasting. That is talking at, not talking with. And if you understand your guests or audience, then you can cater the message so it's more interesting to them. How do you do that? Ask them. Send them communication and go, what worked? What didn't? What could I do better? Some people will it needs to be shorter. It needs to be longer. You don't have to do everything they say, but make adjustments and don't be stubborn, because at the end of the day, it's about the connection and relevancy and wanting them to understand. It's not what you want to say. It's what they want to hear. And you have to understand them a lot better to be able to get to that point. And that's really getting to understand your team, your organization, work with HR, work with other leaders to get to that point.
Well, this is so good. Even, for a living, I work with organizations and I work with them on communicating. I have a marketing person in my life now, and she keeps saying, what does your audience want to hear? What does your audience want to hear? And so when you said that, don't just say what you want to say. What do people need? What do people want? And so I think no matter where you are in your career, it goes back to the very first thing you talked about, self-awareness. And the only way you can be self-aware is to understand situationally what's going on in the world and how am I playing into that. And when I say world, it could be team, it could be family, it could be personal relationships, it could be, dyad relationships, or it could be multiple departments. So really good. So we've got the practice your speaking so people want to hear you. You've got to be entertaining. You've got to talk about something they want to hear. then building trust, planting the seeds of trust, and keeping the trust, watering the root, and nurturing that relationship. And then the third piece is understand who works with you, understand who your employees are. In the ideal culture world, we call that humanistic. Who's Mary married to? What are her children's names? What do they like to do for fun? When Mary's stressed out, what stresses her out? And what days of the week is Mary most stressed out? And maybe I should have my meeting with her on a different day. Who wants beer meetings? Who wants walking meetings? Who wants, uniform meetings? Who needs emails? Who needs follow-up? Who doesn't? You got to know your people. So that's three great ones. Give me, and we've got 5 minutes left. Give me one more.
This goes back to what I talked about a bit earlier. Actually, before I say that, I want to touch on what you said about situational awareness. So again, self-awareness, situational awareness, and communication are the superpowers of any great leader. Situational awareness, you nailed it there, in that to understand the situation, it's not just, well, they're a single mom. They've got, they have to be more flexible on Tuesdays. Like, that's vital. You have to know that. But it's also understanding the subculture, the culture of the organization, and then the world in which we live in. I remember doing a keynote presentation, and I listed 7 things that were impacting employees and teams today that had nothing to do with work.
Right.
Like, it was everything from politics to the economy to climate problems. It was all there. And this is nothing you have control over, but you damn well better be aware of it and understand that this has an influence on the people that are walking through the door to help you every day.
Yeah.
So the situational awareness it expands out. You have to start with yourself, but then the situational awareness just gets further and further out.
You're talking about my logo right now with the circle, the leader within, the team, the everybody else, and then everybody else.
Everybody else.
I read in a neuro-linguistic programming training that on average, there are, I just want to get my stats right, 400,000 bits of information coming into our like circumference of just our awareness. And the human brain, actually, that's not true. It was 120,000 to 140,000 bits of information. We can only even process 120 bits, not 120,000, 120. So as it is, people are already so cognitively scattered, and then they show up to work. So how does the boss or the communicator deal with that, Russell?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Stumped ya.
Yeah.
I didn't do that on purpose.
No, it's all good. It's all good. What I want to lead to is actually the last thing I want to talk about, which is definitions. We don't define things. We don't in the workplace. And I think it's important from a value standpoint. We talked about it earlier, and I think it really needs to be hammer home from a communication point. Because if we're not singing from the same song sheet, then nobody's going to know what we're actually talking about. What does diversity mean in the organization? It's not just what people look like. What does leadership mean? It's not just how people act or don't act. What's a neurodivergent person? What's a neurotypical person? What is we have to be a lot more understanding of and as much as DEI is getting, having a thing right now, it is so important to understand that these things are vital to a healthy organization. We can argue whether you should need a separate program or not for it, but it absolutely needs to be part of the DNA because it'll make your organization more innovative. So if we can go back and define terms, it will help us build those relationships because people will feel seen if we understand what we're talking about, the same things, before we can have those more meaningful conversations.
Yeah, that's so good. Just today, my tech guy came over and we had a miscommunication about what 10 o'clock meant. And we both took responsibility. Oh, I just figured you'd figure it out. If I said the podcast begins at 10, you got to be here at 9. He goes, well, no, I kind of thought you wanted me here at 10 so that I could get ready. And that was both of us making assumptions. And how many times does that happen at work? Times the 500 people you're working with, and somebody's got a cognitive bias about what it means to be ready. Somebody has another bias about what that means. And then everybody's kind of making shit up all day long. And then they say DEI no longer matters, and people are wrapped around the axle about that. But that's a different podcast for a different day. You and I have a very similar philosophy on what diversity means. And I would say it's all about a different perspective, not just
Absolutely.
how you look. It's how you think and how you would approach things. And that's different. And that's important because that's how you solve a problem for good and not just a different day for a different age. So in concluding, your whole work is about relationships at work. What would you say is your best and worst work relationship?
Oh my goodness. That is brilliant. Okay.
I do listen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that immensely. It's a great question and one I have not been asked. If you mean historically or like right this moment?
Whatever you think is more impactful to the audience.
I think the most important and best relationship I have right now is with myself. I think that's the best relationship I have right now. It's helping me. I love that. It's helping me. I'm doing a lot of work right now of trying to figure out what my own next steps are in my leadership journey, as we're all on one, and trying to figure out what does that look like from a life design standpoint. And I'm really happy with where I am at. So I have a lot of confidence in myself, and then I'm going to choose the right thing for what I need. But I'm still navigating that. So I think the most important relationship, and the best relationship I have right now is with myself. Does that sound narcissistic? That doesn't sound too narcissistic,
actually,
right?
Okay, I think this is where narcissism has really gotten everybody's a label, right? You take care of yourself and now you're a narcissist. A narcissist does things to screw with other people. A narcissist is not somebody who's putting their own oxygen mask on, because if you can't be your best you can't be anybody to anybody else. And typically true narcissists, I have a very strong coach that I use, Dr. Margaret Paul. She does inner bonding, highly recommend her to everybody. She has me reading a book about sociopaths and narcissists. And it's not somebody who takes care of themselves. It's on the contrary, it would be, like it's all about me. You're not talking like that. You're not talking.
This is the benefit of a video podcast that I'm enjoying that, by the way. That was fantastic.
Yeah, well. So if you're listening only, I was like looking at myself in the camera, kissing myself, all that selfies and, boob shots and all the other things we do, peck shots. And that's a little on the narcissistic side, but it's also when you use what you want to manipulate other people.
Totally. And I think the worst relationship I have, and this is getting super personal, is one of the problems I've had in my career is mentorship. I've never had a really good mentor for an extended period of time, or a coach. It's not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of people in my life coming in and out, but it's always been a struggle sometimes it's either because they weren't the right fit or whatever, but it's been a journey that I've continued to be on, is trying to figure out what mentorship looks like for me. Not that I love mentoring others, and I've done that repeatedly through my career, but finding somebody for myself has been more of a challenge than I'd like to admit, but it's certainly one that I've had. It's been an interesting one. Okay.
Are you willing to take some mentoring advice from me?
Do it. It's your show. Go ahead.
So before we ever do an engagement, sure, we give this psychometrics assessment to people, and then they get a debrief. And in the debrief, we can say, here's what you said your values were. Here's your operating style. Here's how you see the world. Here's where your biases are. Here's where you accelerate, like you excel in leadership. And here's the area where you probably need some work. Happy to give you one of those and comp you on a debrief, and then tell you at least what to look for in a mentor. Because you see, a lot of us are flying without our dials because we don't even know there are dials. And this inner metrics that I used back in the day, can't even believe I can say that now, that there was a day, but in my recruiting career, it helped me place over 10,000 people in a 25-year period because I got to see here's the not just one piece of the DNA, but the biases, the thoughts, the perspectives, the prefrontal cortex competencies, the behaviors. And it could really help. Like I have not kept the same coach for the last 15 years. I purposely, though, seek out coaches who are stronger at things that I'm not. So Dr. Margaret Paul deals with inner bonding. I grew up in an addictive family. We had one parent who was addicted to the spouse. She was the codependent. And then we had the heroin addict who was a type A personality, a top producer. There's no accident I do what I do now, because often the quote unquote addict is the one that's the type A who keeps the job because they're producing results, but everybody ignores the bad behavior. It's just like living in an addictive family. So I have a coach for that. I have a coach for spiritual things. I have a coach for fitness. And about every 3 years, I'm cycling in to a new relationship because I'm a different person than I was.
Yeah. Fair.
And it's one of the reasons I keep training, because people don't cycle me out that often, but I'm not the same person I was a year ago.
Right.
I'm not schlepping the same, do your sculpt process, do your sculpt process, do your sculpt process. I'm like, who's here now and who's here now? But I still think there becomes a point where the cadence of coaching needs to change. So I'm happy if you want to take me up on that. I know we're talking again in a couple of weeks. If you want to take me up on that, I'm happy to. And also give you a list of people that I have worked with who I would swear by that they are powerful coaches.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So all in all, what's the one thing you want to leave the guests with about relationships at work?
It's just going to be a through line from our conversation is it's know you first, and then you'll be much better for everybody else you're building a relationship with. The most important relationship you can have at work is with yourself.
God, that's so good. I just did a podcast that he said, what causes the most dysfunction? I said, us. We
get in our own way so easily. Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Russell. And if people want to reach you, here we have on the screen, if you're watching this, Relationships at Work, the podcast. But if for people who are listening, what's the URL? It's
relationshipsatworkshow.com. It's a little easier to spell than my name. So that's the best way to go, is relationshipsatworkshow.com.
And then if they want to link into Russel Lolacher, spell that out, please.
Sure. It's real easy to spell because it's the name Lola, and Cher is my last name. So my first name's Russell with one L, Russel. And my last name's Lolacher, Lolacher. How we found that out is my brother wanted to put our last name as a tattoo on his knuckles. I kid you not, true story. And he discovered that Lola was on one knuckle and Cher was on the other.
That's awesome. All right, Russel Lolacher, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we look forward to seeing you on our next, having you listen to our next episode of Work Liberated. Have a great day. Bye-bye.